Okay. Hello, good afternoon, good evening, friends, and also our special honor for Mr. Teddy as our before we begin the presentation, let me introduce myself first. My name is Marcella Karwur. I'm the leader of Group 7, and the members of Group 7 are Natasya Aretha, Fadhila, Marina, and Mutiara. So we're here today to present our group work, which you can see it on your screen now. And let's begin the presentation. Please welcome the first presenter, Mutiara.
Next slide, please. Okay, thank you, Marcella. First, the author doesn't agree with the statement that World Trade Organization harm first country. In his argument, it was stated that the WTO is the best friend available to exporters in poor countries. Without conducting trade liberation on their own, developing countries are required an open market for all its members, including developing countries. In the Uruguay round of trade negotiation, the GITT-rich countries want developing countries to participate in it, but developing countries feel deprived because what? The opening of agricultural markets is not realistic. 2. Cutting industrial tariff more deeply than developed countries. And 3. Developed countries carry out a global intellectual property rights regime that damages poor countries' access to cheap medicines. Okay, the next explanation will be delivered by Fadhila.
Okay, the next is, however, poor countries still benefited because developing countries liberalized more. After that, developed countries removed quotas on imports of textiles and clothing at the inducement of developing countries. And then, in this report, it's also written that the World Trade Organization offers low and middle-income countries a rule-based forum to defend their trade interests and rights. Okay, that's all from me. And the next is argument.
Okay, so WTO doesn't harm poor countries. In fact, it benefits them. About 2/3 of the WTO's members are developing countries. They play an increasingly important and active role in the WTO because of their numbers. The WTO agreements include numerous provisions giving developing and least developed countries special rights or excellency, special and differential treatment. Among these are provisions that allow developed countries to treat developing countries more favorably than other WTO members. The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, or GATT, which deals with trade in goods, has a special section, that is Part 4, on trade and development, which includes provisions on the concept of non-reciprocity in trade negotiation between developed and developing countries. When developed countries grant trade concessions to developing countries, they should not expect the developing countries to make matching offers in return. This allows many developing countries and least developed countries to benefit from the opportunities created by emerging new markets, to integrate the world market through global value chains at lower cost, and to reap the rewards from higher world commodity prices. Incomes in developing countries have been converging with those of rich countries. Since the year 2000, GDP per capita of developing countries has grown by 4.7%, with developing country G20 members performing particularly strongly. Meanwhile, as a result, developing countries now account for more than half of world output in purchasing power parity terms. Higher GDP per capita helps to achieve other societal objectives, such as reducing poverty and protecting the environment. Given that more trade is associated with faster growth, trade can make it easier to achieve these goals. And that's all for me. The next argument will be stated by Natasya.
Okay, thank you, Marina. So, uh, I agree with instrumental to poor countries that benefit these countries by the exchanges of multilateral trade, which benefit the less developed countries. The drop of two important trending instruments, namely public stockholding for food security purpose and special safeguard mechanism, which is awaiting approval from the WTO. Proves proof that the WTO cares about developing and least developing countries because the ratification of the PSH will provide police for countries to continue to be able to provide support to small and poor farmers by purchasing rice for stock purpose at price above market price and distributing it to the poor at price. So subsides as well as SSM, which can be used as an instrument of protection of the domestic market from the possibility of a flood of important agricultural product that can harm the interest of poor and small farmers. So that's it. I want to uh, say my argument back to the moderator.
Okay, everyone. So to sum up everything that has been delivered by my friend, I would like to give you guys the conclusion. So it is not true that WTO harms poor countries. We are disagree with the title of the article because as written on the body text, actually WTO is the best friend for poor countries, especially in export sector. For example, the Uruguay round, the eight multilateral trade negotiations that held under the framework of the General Trade and Traffic Agreement or GATT, which involved 123 countries, including developing countries, obviously, generate improved GATT trade flows to areas that previously exempted as too difficult to liberalize, such as agriculture and textiles, and also arrange some important new areas that previously not included, which is trade in services, intellectual property, and investment policy trade distortions. And those things are giving developing countries new hopes in building their economic mass. And if you guys have any question or any statement, please feel free uh, to tell us. And thank you so much for your attention.
Oke, pulang ya. Okay, I'm Bisma. I'm the first reviewer. Uh, so why do developing countries like Indonesia suffer loss? Indonesia participation as a member of the World Trade Organization since 1994 is considered more detrimental to this country. Although quantitatively the evidence cannot be shown, it is clearly visible materially. The Indonesian people have lost many job opportunities, so the country is forced to export raw goods abroad. As a result, the national company went bankrupt and laid off most of its work.
Oke, mungkin tambahan dari aku, like the community farmers and MSME as will lose a just market. Therefore, the failure of the Minister of Tourism
and Creative Economy Marcella in the collection of WTO Director General. Candidates at the end of last month can be used as a moment to immediately move away um, from the World Trade Organization. Come to the front of by promoting an alternative economy will be far more beneficial for Indonesia than following WTO standards. Maybe that's enough.
Yeah.
Okay, I will I will make my argument according to Amal argument. Um, the World Trade Organization provides an opportunity for Indonesia to cooperate and have links with the international economy because it's difficult to advance the economy, including marketing agricultural products and developing UMKM on a global scale without links to the international economy. And then alternative economy also do not necessarily make the Indonesian economy better. And to implement an alternative economy requires good planning and needs to think it carefully. Without the existence of the World Trade Organization and relation with other countries, it will be difficult to enter the global market. That's all from me.
Leaving the WTO will have positive implication for the growth of the domestic economy. The reason is Indonesia can determine its own policy without the shadow of the WTO, which is known as three major binding agreements relating to goods, services, and scientific property rights.
Okay, I'm Nur Azaksham. I'm from Group A. I want to add argument from Elsa. And in the good sector, the YTO requires the elimination of all tariff on non-tariff for import goods. From the service sector, it is more to market access. And he did not talk about tariff, but rather that there were not restriction in the following four characters and goods transport, service, tourist, service companies, and labor. Thank you.
I want to respond to Elsa's argument. If a developing country like Indonesia leave the WTO, there will be losses. For example, Indonesia will not be able to export to developed country, cannot maintain the market, and cannot enter into international trade and monetary relations. In addition, the principle of international trade in the WTO also exclude developing countries in certain matters which are based on the principle of balance and are related to the solidarity, where this principle has a close relationship with development interests, especially in developing countries, because international trade is one of the most important factors in the economic development of member countries for the purpose of improving the standard of living, social and economy of all nations. And there is a principle of protection of developing countries in the WTO, which is to provide protection to member countries, especially developing countries, to achieve economic improvement called the principle of collective security for development or the principle of guarantee or collective protection for development. That's it.
I would like to add some response for what Risma said before. I think it can really be said that Indonesia sustained losses because we incorporated in WTO because WTO gives Indonesia protection for international trade activities, including export sector, as agreed on the agreement. So even though we do export, not necessarily means that we give them all of our natural resources because they will always based on the agreement. Thus, it's up to the government. Uh, the government must think well, very well, which agreement will be beneficial and which will be harmful for Indonesia. And in my opinion, there will also always be plus minus in everything, especially in economic cooperation. And for this case, I think WTO can benefit Indonesia more than giving harmful effects for Indonesia. Thank you.
Okay, I want to add some argument too about Risma question. So, in the WTO KTM, it was started that in the agricultural sector, developed countries provide protection for developing countries. Developed countries are also committed to reducing their agricultural subsides. In addition, poor countries get the aid of traffic system and trade facilities that can be done by these countries. Okay. And then these two things are also very influential on the job opportunities mentioned by Risma with the development of the agricultural sector in developing countries. It will automatically open up new jobs. Besides that, I also mentioned that trade facilities can be facilitate where business people in developing countries can maximize their potential. And if you say this has an impact on reducing employment opportunities in developing countries, on the contrary, in developing countries like Indonesia, which has a large workforce and a small amount of capital, can produce and export goods that are relatively laboratives. Okay, that's all. 7 ya? 8, oke. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, for group 8, is that clear or any argument?
Maybe it's clear from us.
Okay, thank you so much for group 8 for your argument and for your review and response. We apa tuh? We appreciate you guys for responding us. Udah, thank you. Okay, bye bye.